Hello, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Monette, Senior Director Responsible Investment at PSP Investments. PSP Investments is one of Canada's largest pension fund managers with assets under management of over $200 billion in Canadian dollar terms. PSP is responsible for the management of funds transferred to it by the Government of Canada on behalf of public service employee, the Canadian Forces, Reserve Force, and Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Over today's presentation, it will be my pleasure to walk through the journey of PSP Investments into the development of its ESG Composite score, talk about some background on ESG ratings, provide some insights into some of the critical data inputs, including the SASB standards and the True Value Labs data feed, and close in with some real-life examples. In order to develop a better understanding on the materiality of ESG factors and the impact of the ESG factors on enterprise value today and into the future, PSP embarked on the journey on developing a ESG composite score about 2 years ago. The main objectives sought out in the development of a composite score were first, to create a dynamic tool supported by quantitative data to achieve greater comparability, to enable more systematic portfolio monitoring with the creation of more scalable processes, and lastly, to establish a common definition of ESG materiality across issuers on a total fund basis. The methodology of the composite score is based on two key building blocks. The foundational building block starts with a quantitative assessment on the quality of corporate governance practices at the issuer level compared to its listing market, leveraging data from the ISS governance quality scores. The second building block, the ESG materiality score, is based on the SASB standard classification to identify material categories of risk and opportunities, and data from third-party providers from Sustainalytics and True Value Labs. The Sustainalytics and True Value Labs data are used at the category level, enabling us to recalculate a customized score using our proprietary methodology. What we believe is particularly innovative about PSP's approach is the alignment with an industry-based classification to identify material categories of ESG risk and opportunities, and the dynamic weighting of these categories using an artificial intelligence screening tool developed by True Value Labs. The dynamic weighting are updated daily based on the True Value algorithm that captures changes in stakeholder sentiment in real time. We believe that one of the benefits of using the composite score in complementarity with existing third-party provider scores is to provide a more forward-looking signal into ESG performance. When starting the journey of building the composite score, we wanted to look at the academic literature to better understand the current state of ESG ratings. We felt that one of the compelling reasons to develop a proprietary score was the very low correlation observed between third-party ESG ratings. Some studies have documented that correlations between third-party ESG ratings tends to be roughly 0.61. The same studies have also looked at the sources of divergence that explain these low correlations and found two major sources of variations. First, scope, or the categories of ESG risk used to calculate ESG risk ratings. And second, measurement, or the KPIs, or key performance indicators, used to measure performance on these specific categories. Therefore, we felt that by aligning PSP's methodology with the SASB standard classification, we would enable greater harmonization of our scoring process on a total fund basis and across issuers. In a nutshell, we believe that the use of the composite score can provide a regional lens into how we analyze corporate governance quality. Second, improve the transparency in our scoring process by aligning with an industry ESG disclosure standard. And third but not least, provide also an outside stakeholder perspective by using unstructured data from True Value Labs. We will now spend some time discussing how we measure the financial materiality of ESG factors. The SASB standards were developed to help issuers disclose sustainability information that is financially material to investors. One of the factors that drove the selection of True Value Labs in our scoring process was the fact that it was one of the first data providers to partner up with SASB and generate scores off of the standards. In this example, True Value Labs looked at historical data to determine whether their algorithm captured an outsized volume of articles relating to categories of ESG risk and opportunities later deemed as material by SASB. The chart illustrates that on average, across industries analyzed, about 80% of article volumes in fact related to these material ESG categories identified as material in the SASB standard due process. So this offered a strong confirmation signal in our due diligence assessment. In addition to providing alignment with the SASB standard classification, True Value also performs some backtesting analysis that provides some early indication of potential financial outperformance. True Value developed an ESG activity signal that incorporates ESG data volume and a long-term measure of a company's ESG track record. The long-term ESG track record is quantitatively generated by True Value's algorithm using machine learning and natural language processing to capture ESG signals from unstructured text. In this analysis, True Value found that for the period covering from 2008 to 2019, the top quintile of companies receiving the highest volume of positive articles on material ESG categories tended to outperform other quintiles of companies over time, which offered a second confirmation signal in the composition of our methodology. And closing in now on some real-life practical examples to illustrate how the composite score can help us surface the unique signature of the materiality of specific ESG considerations across markets and sectors. In this first example, we will be looking at the top categories of ESG risk and opportunities for emerging markets versus developed markets. Across regions, we notice that product design and lifecycle management emerges as the top category of risk, which was partly explained by the high representation of the financial industry in this associated with this category, and also, interestingly, seems to coincide with the launch of the Principles for Responsible Investment Banking initiative and the increase of signatories to this initiative in recent years. Similarly, we note that GHG emission and energy management are ranked second and third in terms of ESG materiality across regions. Again, with a significant focus on climate change ahead of COP26 and the number of net zero commitments announced over the last year, it's to no surprise that we notice these two categories ranked as with very high materiality. But interestingly, when we look at the fourth category of highest materiality, we notice that supply chain management emerges as the fourth highest risk in emerging markets, which seems to coincide with greater stakeholder attention, particularly throughout the pandemic, around human rights conditions in the supply chain and modern slavery risks. Turning over to developed markets, we notice that employee engagement, diversity, and inclusion ranks in the fourth position, which also coincides with greater regulatory attention to this disclosure around workforce composition, as well as recent controversies around equity, diversity, and inclusion at some high-profile companies over the course of the last year. Turning now over to an example for one industry, using the case of the information technology sector across emerging and developed markets, it's interesting to note the contrast in the highest categories of materiality across regions, which seems to stem from the difference in composition of the sector across emerging and developed markets. Looking at emerging markets, we note that supply chain management emerges as the second category of highest materiality, which could be explained by the high representation of semiconductor chip maker in the sector, where critical material sourcing is an issue of very high materiality, as we know. Looking at the same industry for developed markets, where software companies tend to have a high representation, and for the fight for talent tends to be critical for long-term financial performance, we note that employee engagement, diversity, inclusion is ranked in second position. In closing, We would like to thank all our research partners for the development of this composite score, and would like to also highlight that the composite score not only helped provide an additional layer of data-driven insight into our processes, but also helped accelerate the convergence between ESG and fundamental analysis. Thank you.